The attack on Manchester was shocking, appalling, indefensible, wrong in every possible way. The parallel I was drawing this morning was that a number of people, ever since the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, have drawn attention to the links with foreign policy, including Boris Johnson in 2005, two former heads of MI5, and of course the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. And the point I was making was we have to make our streets secure, we have to make our population secure. We also, any sensible government has got to look to what is happening in Libya, a huge ungoverned space, and apparently a source of some awful extremism.
But was Manchester a consequence of our foreign policy?
Manchester was a consequence of one person going into a music event and killing a very large number of people. There can be no defence whatsoever of that. No, it's not Islam at all. What we have is a total perversion of Islam there. The point I'm making, and the point that many others have made, not of necessarily Labour opinion or any other, quite a wide range of opinion across the spectrum, is that you have the consequences of our interventions in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, leaving large numbers of ungoverned spaces, leaving people in a desperate situation who themselves may become prey to that form of perversion. And I think it would be unwise of any government to ignore that. And that is exactly what the Foreign Affairs Select Committee pointed out. What I'm saying is that it would be unwise of any government or anywhere in the world to ignore the issue of instability across the piece, which gives a space for that kind of perversion of Islam to take hold. Barack Obama has said as much. Many others have said as much.
You've called for, your phrase was, smarter ways today to deal with countries harbouring terrorists. But you wouldn't put boots on the ground, you wouldn't bomb the terrorists, you wouldn't use drones to take out the terrorist leaders. So what would you do? Would you talk to them?
ISIS, no, I wouldn't. ISIS doesn't come from nowhere. ISIS doesn't get its money from nowhere. ISIS doesn't get its arms from nowhere. ISIS does have a whole lot of connections around the world, financial and others, which I think need to be robustly chased and followed.
That's it. That's the smarter way.
That's a good start for doing it. The other one is to look at the situation in Libya, where you have a lack of government, where you need stronger presence of UN diplomacy in order to bring about the start of some stronger form of government there. Otherwise, you've got a problem which isn't going to go away. And that is a view that I put forward in what was intended to be a thoughtful contribution this morning of how we deal with these things. And I think you'll find actually quite a lot of the public would not disagree with what I've said.
Why would the British people want as their leader a man who for years supported the IRA?
I didn't support the IRA. I don't support the IRA. What I want everywhere is a peace process. What I want everywhere is decency and human rights. We went through all the horrors of Northern Ireland from the all through the 70s and 80s, through the period of the Troubles, and eventually came from that a peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, and now relative peace and stability. And actually, you know, Northern Ireland has been a bit of a model around the world. It certainly helped in the peace process in Colombia. It's a model that's been used in trying to bring communities together in South Africa and other places. I think there's something we can all learn from Northern Ireland, where the two big divides, the nationalist tradition and the unionist tradition, came together on a basis of recognising a different tradition each had. That's quite powerful. I always said that the bombing process would never work, that there wasn't a military solution to be found in Northern Ireland. I made that very clear. I made that very clear in the House of Commons and other places.
Did you urge the IRA to stop the bombs and the bullets? I never met the IRA. All its front people that you did meet all the time.
I obviously did meet people from Sinn Féin, as indeed I met people from other organisations. And I always made the point that there had to be a dialogue and a peace process. Now, a lot of people did a lot of work on this, and eventually it was Mo Mowlam, as much as anybody else, that managed to bring those groups together, and she used a lot of connections in order to bring those people together.
Isn't the truth is that you've basically supported the armed struggle for a united Ireland, but now you want to be Prime Minister, you have to distance yourself from it?
No. What I want is peace. What I want is to learn the lessons from Northern Ireland, and also to make sure during the Brexit negotiations we don't return to or receive any kind of hard border between the North and the Republic. A lot of people lost their lives in Northern Ireland. It was an appalling situation.
IRA killed 1,800 people.
Yes, and people killed by loyalist bombs as well. All deaths are appalling, all deaths are wrong. There isn't a military solution to a conflict between traditions and communities. There has to be a better way and a better process of doing it. But on the anti-terrorist legislation that came before Parliament, I voted to ensure that there was legal oversight of our police and our security services, that there wasn't executive power given.
But you've voted 56 times against toughening up our security capabilities.
Can I finish a moment?
Of course.
David Davis and a number of others voted with me on those occasions because they too were concerned about executive powers and executive orders overriding a court process. And I think the best defence against terrorism, the best defence against any attack on democracy is to protect the independence of a judicial process away from the political process. And the Prevention of Terrorism Act was eventually repealed.
I'm not just talking about that.
I realise that. It was eventually repealed partly because of the executive powers that were implicit in it. I want to work within NATO to achieve stability. I want to work within NATO to promote human rights and democracy. And under a Labour government, that's exactly what we'd be doing.
But do you think it's a Frankenstein?
I think all organisations need to be accountable.
Do you support the renewal of the Trident deterrent?
It's there in the programme, and therefore it's
going ahead. So what I asked you, Mr. Corbyn, do you support the renewal of Trident?
I voted against the renewal of it. Everybody knows that, because I wanted to go in a different direction. That is a decision that's been taken. I respect that decision.
But can you tell the British people tonight that you support the renewal of Trident?
We're going ahead with the programme which has been agreed by Parliament and voted on by the Labour Party.
Do you support it?
Listen, my views on nuclear weapons are well known. I want to achieve a nuclear-free world through multilateral disarmament, through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. 95% of the population will pay no more tax under Labour, no more national insurance, and no higher VAT. What we have is a country where 6 million people earn less than the living wage. We have a country where there are unprecedented waiting times and waiting lists in our hospitals, 1 million people denied social care, and an increasing number of people sleeping on our streets. This has to be the time that we stop making the poorest in our society pay the price of austerity and start investing for the future. What we're proposing is an investment bank which will invest in all parts of this country, particularly those areas that have seen precious little investment since the end of the coal industry and in some places the end of the steel industry. Take the water industry, for example, which has been a method of siphoning off profits out of this country to offshore companies who've made a lot of money, at the same time leaving us with expensive water and in some cases very bad levels of pollution.
I understand the case, but you would need to borrow to buy the utilities.
No, it's not. It's a swap of the shares for a government bond.
But if you're issuing bonds, Mr. Corbyn, you're issuing government debt. You are borrowing.
Issuing bonds that we own, which would be paid for by the profits from the industry.
But you said you said you would cut the water utilities profits. That means you wouldn't have the money to pay for the bonds.
Instead of the profits being siphoned off, they would remain here. That's an advantage, surely. We're in favour of managed immigration when the free movement ends, when we leave the European Union. We are against people being brought in as wholesale workforces to undermine existing working conditions and workers. There will be managed migration in the future based on the economic needs of our society. We've had Theresa May promising in 3 elections to make cuts to immigration. I'm making no promises on that. What I'm saying is the immigration issue would be dealt with on the basis of necessary family reunions and also the economic needs of the country as a whole.
Would you try to cut the numbers?
Well, if the economy is doing well and we train people properly, then the need to bring in skilled workers from overseas will obviously reduce. This manifesto has been agreed by everyone in our party. This manifesto has enormous levels of public support. This manifesto has been campaigned for day in, day out on the streets of this country. And you know what? People like the contents of it because it offers them hope. It offers them opportunity. It offers our young people an opportunity to get the education they want, to get the skilled jobs that they want, and it offers hope in the sense of community cohesion. I would hope that people would judge me and our party on the basis of the principles we're putting forward in this election. An investment for our future, a better future for younger people in our society, proper treatment of those that need help and care and support through a social care system, and an education system that doesn't undermine our children with lack of funding.